But there will be individuals who will be more interested in funding them.
But I think when I'm using the term communities of practice, it's not about communities as in a geographical group. It's about people who are coming into this with different reasons. There are people who are just data geeks, where if you can actually open up your problem to them, it's kind of actually the way to solve that is a doddle. But it's finding the way to focus that person's attention to release the bottleneck, rather than swamping them with stuff where they just become annoyed and leave.
I think one has to distinguish between sort of community archaeology groups, where what James is saying certainly applies against, I would say, so science geeks who want to just apply something fancy, maybe some programming tasks, apply them to some data. They may not necessarily be interested in the archaeology which underlies this, but they have a problem that has good data and that needs to be solved. I think that would be the kind of community that would be relevant for such a project.
But that comes back to really having a bit of direction for people who are not actually fundamentally interested in the...
Do we have a bit more time on this slot? Because
yes,
I would quite like to talk a bit more about the open data issue.
Can I just a specific point really, which was to bounce the question back from the first instance to Chris and Keith, but any of the other academics in the audience, do you see Dart questions as a kind of huge reservoir of MSc projects to keep you going? Are you going to push them? Are you going to nod people early on? That actually, I'm constantly frustrated by how effort in universities is dissipated on all sorts of fashion and stuff I don't approve of. But so it was a question about how you see your role in actually directing the next kind of 5 years or whatever of masters and postgraduate research on the back of Dart.
Well, I would say it's an easy hit for a master's project, because in a way the time-consuming element of it's been done, isn't it? It's the analysis that is the interesting part which needs to be done. So certainly from a point of view of laboratory sedimentological data and correlation with geophysical attributes, I think they would make some very good master's projects.
It would, but of course most of the students also need to have some sort of data collected themselves. If they're going to go and work commercial, they actually need to have that experience as well. So I think that there'll be blended projects where they'll be looking at one particular aspect, but they'll be going and testing it somewhere else. That would be my hope. Can I go back to open data?
Yeah, open data. It's something I think is really interesting, and obviously, well, at least to my mind, quite unique to the Dart project. People are talking about open data. When we first started talking about open data, initially I thought, oh, that's a good idea, let's do this. Then came the phase where I saw all the problems. And there are many problems. The problem is, for example, that although we say open data and we want to share, it is still such a research project operates in a competitive environment. Research funding is competitive. Hence, you have to protect your assets. It's sort of this internal circle where everything is still competitive, and then the government says, but now you have to make it all open. It doesn't quite work if you do it this way. So there are really issues that people haven't thought through properly. And we certainly came across this issue of how do we protect our intellectual assets, especially how do we protect our PhD students who have to work on something which has to be novel by the time they submit their PhD, and not compromise this. But then, once you get beyond this, obviously it's a very good idea. But for me, it was really an eye-opener how much effort you have to put in and how much funding actually you need in order to set it up such that it's useful. I think it's not just putting it on a server. The way, for example, Dart has implemented this is extremely sophisticated and fairly robust. were it just on a server, I'm sure next year it would all fall down and nobody would know how to do it. With the setup we have, it is far more certain that we have access in the years to come. And my question really would be if you can already see how you would want to interact with the data, or what you would want to do with the data. James?
I think this is a brilliant aspect of DART, I think, this open data. I really appreciate this. I mean, I think it's the way forward for all of us. I really do. I mean, I can't say enough how optimistic I am. When I saw Ant run it live and process the data like that, I thought that was brilliant. I mean, so I'm fully behind all the effort that's gone in. I could see that it must have taken a lot of effort to get it up and running that way, because I've thought of this myself for many years. How could I do it with my own stuff? And I've never come up with an answer. So I think and if all local societies could be using the same processes to get their stuff online, it's a way to get things open in a way that we haven't been looking at before, I think.
I'm interested to hear your concern. I mean, I share James' enthusiasm, and I think we all were impressed by seeing the open data and trying to pick up ideas from going forward. I mean, I think you mentioned you had citation opportunities, is that right? But
sorry,
you had some links within the stuff you were showing that you said it was citable.
all of those URIs are citable.
Yeah.
There's a BibTeX snippet in there you could put into your reference management software.
I think some of this is about people coming to recognise that you are publishing. If it's citable, you publish. So if your PhD students want to show the novelty of their work, you get it out there and it's citable. I mean, I'm not speaking academic, so you can really throw egg on my face if I'm talking rubbish. But is that not,
I mean, I think yes and no, isn't it? I mean, I think it's a good way, it illustrates that in fact our data is being reused. And that's the same way that if you have an idea and you write it in an article and somebody reuses that idea, they have to cite that idea.
But
that makes
But I think the important point is we are at the transitional setup where we go from this is completely out of order because we have to protect our data to maybe in the future data, publication, whatever, it's all the same. Whether you publish your intellectual thoughts on a topic or whether you publish the data you have collected very carefully, it's equal.
I would encourage you to do it and to make it citable. That's how people break down the barriers. I mean, if we sit here and say, ooh, but, then we won't do it, other people won't do it. And I know it's hard, and maybe
we're being pushed towards making impact. Our data needs to create impact. The REF 2014, we're just coming with a final push for the information that we're putting into universities. 20% of the funding that comes out of that assessment will be for impact of our work. In 2020, it will be 25%. Okay, so it's going up. The more impact our work has, the more money we are likely to get in the future. So so it's not that's not an issue that's going to go away. I think though that but in amongst that REF equation, there is still a large amount that goes. 65% of every unit of assessment is for the quality of your publications. Okay? So in other words, if you keep your data long enough, write brilliant papers, get 4-star, world-class attributions on those, and then release the data, that's actually that's the sensible way from the academic point of view.
But
So there's a real conundrum at the moment.
this is a rapidly changing environment, and the position that we're in now is very different from the position we were in when we wrote the application. Being able to provide data looks like it is going to become part of the metrics of career progression for academics, and it is part and parcel of the whole impact framework. Armin is also right. The amount of time and effort that it's taken to build up this repository has not been negligible. And we had a digital humanities event here yesterday about getting a loosely coupled community of practice on digital humanities, to which, as an institution, we have no repository. How the hell are we going to share data? We're going to pass USB sticks around between one another. This is just ludicrous. So many of the university institutions have got a lot of catch-up to play to actually get to the position where they can actually engage in this space, because they're not there. We have organisations like the ADS who do a fantastic job in archiving the data, but their remit is for archiving and not necessarily for reuse. And we're here as trying to provide reuse within that environment as fast as possible. And so there needs to be, relationships built so that, groups can share data and reuse data, but it feeds into those kind of archival processes as well. But all of this is going to
defend the ADS there. Really, the remit also is for reuse.
Yes, but the thing is that
I just should say, ADS is not just an archive. ADS has a remit to make sure the data which they hold is used and is being made available to the community.
Okay.
Just a side comment, sorry.
I'll take it back for being slightly too harsh. But the point is, it comes down to this issue of timeliness, I think, is my underlying point. The issue with getting something into the ADS is that that's a part of that coherent archive that you then put forward. What we're doing is something that's part of practice, which we're evolving as we go through the stuff. Our current stage is current stage is suitable for the ADS. 6 months ago, we were still collecting and wasn't. And so it's all about when you provide it and how you provide it and the licenses that you produce. One of the other problems with having this project is also domain expectations. We're an interdisciplinary project. What people do in archaeology is different from what people do in computer science and what people do in soil engineering. And we're encouraged to do multidisciplinary research. We're encouraged to have greater impact in the range of different communities that we work with and also serve. But we also have to recognise that each of those different groups has different ways in which they deal with data. And one of the problems of Dart is not necessarily that we're overly ambitious, because we were, but that those different environments deal with data in different ways. And once you reach to your archive stage, everybody's happy. But it's how you actually negotiate that path in the first instance. And these kind of problems are going to affect everyone for at least the next 5 or 10 years, because they're not solved and we haven't solved them. We've just found a way through it.
Can I just ask, what's the future like for the Dart repository? And do you expect people to continue to add data to it?
We have the server in place till 2015. We have the server in place and under warranty till 2015.
Maybe you can extend that warranty a bit.
Yeah.
But it's still a finite. The machine will die after.
At that point, it's kind of up for grabs. We're not the ADS. We're not here to have this as a resource in perpetuity. Now, much of the data will go over to the ADS as part of the archive commitment we already have through the funding round. But that doesn't mean to say it's going to be the whole archive or the depth of richness. So that's something that's going to have to come through. But yeah, 2015.
Then a lot of those things won't necessarily be part of that archive, like the known data will be hosted by any OBC. Sorry.
But the other thing that we've done is look at being very explicit about our licenses, and that really hasn't come up here. It's open data. The open data is only really open because of the licenses, and it's the licensing that's important. When we're one of the things that I'm trying to do as a side project at the minute is discussions with the Heritage Lottery Fund. They produced a wonderful document last year about how to manage digital data on projects that they commission and or granted money. And they have a specific section on data and data licensing, where they say Creative Commons, fantastic. Not all data is suitable for Creative Commons, but by the by, which is by attribution, you should reference the data. And then they put on non-commercial. Well, non-commercial is ludicrous. If you're starting to fund a heritage project, then it means that if a Oxford Archaeology, whatever commercial unit, can't actually immediately access that data. They've got to ask for an exemption. Now, we're not living in the world where you pick up the phone and ask for an exemption. We're living in a world where you start to automatically aggregate resources over the web. And if we start to put license constraints on our data that stop it being easily reusable, we're just going to create isolated islands of data that are never going to be integrated and never going to be reused. They're just going to be marginalized because we've licensed them into an entity status. And we can't do that. Here endeth my hobby horse.
Just to move it on a bit and to come to your point about, we've been talking about digital data and processing and all that sort of thing, but I'm changing my hat to an archaeologist now. And I want, anomalies and crop marks are all very well, but they're actually the result of things people did, and I want to see interpretations potentially. And David made a throwaway comment about Grubenhaus and things like that, these little interesting things that you look at, and as an experienced archaeologist, you think, well, that could be this. That will all come after, I suspect, that the data is left with the ADS or something. Is there a mechanism for, say, someone who comes later on to start adding to the archive, saying, I want to interpret, for instance, the multispectral data, I want hyperspectral. I know that doesn't just cover one field, it'll be square kilometres worth. There'll be loads of data in there that other people might want to go and interpret at some point. Is there a way that they can feed back in and say, look, I want to get this into the archive?
But it's not an archive in that respect. There is an.
I want to put it into the open data source.
Well, but in something like that, we could build the Open Archaeology Map. The OSM does it. You could create the OAM and start to put in your interpretations of readings online. A very similar solution has been talked about for the utility companies using their geophysical data. So instead of just having inaccessible resources, you've actually put it in a public forum. But the issue with that is then one about ethics. You've made this available. Well, are people going to go out and do night hawking and denude the country of its heritage? Well, yes, but then again, they probably knew that anyway. I think we hand in hand to the open data is the conversation that we need to have, on licensing and on ethics and on reuse, because they don't exist in isolation, and we need to move away from the very polarised debate on ethics about night hawkers denuding sites into the areas of grey that go on in between, because the other side of that one is academics who've got data, who have sat on for all of their lives and isn't feeding through to the planning process or evidence-led management or curatorial control. These are both bad poles, and the answer is somewhere in the shades of grey in the middle.
Shades of grey. It's going to stop. I think we need to move on to the next mini session, I think. But I'm sure that
Some questions will come up.
I'm sure they will. What is the next mini session?
The next is funny enough, policy and curatorial impact on that point of development control. Unfortunately, we led curation and policy. So please do feel free to chip in with your own observations in that area. You've just heard mine, but we can imagine that we have our own little virtual Quinton here. So, but Dave is our main discussant.
It's a very mini session. You can sort it up.
Okay, yeah.
Is that all right, Chris? You look like you don't approve.
No, I don't, obviously. That's just in general. I'll tell you what, I'm going to take a seat here and I'm going to pretend to know something about development control. So I'll let you keep going.
I was going to start by saying, actually, that I'm very grateful to Anne for crediting me with involvement at the beginning of this, but to kind of caricature of Winston Churchill, that was somebody being given so much credit for so little effort. I'm just going to, we've been sort of kind of going on about the open data end of things, but that is absolutely a fundamental outcome of DART. And my hope is that actually it becomes an exemplar that drives a lot of the implication, which as Anne said, of the EU and government stated policy that is being irregularly and only partially implemented by many government agencies. I mean, in my own organisation, a lot of the heritage information is available free online through the CAMRA database, but a lot of the actual really useful stuff, high-res aerial photography and so on, is behind the paywall, and it is subject to what some people, not me, might call restricted licensing. So I think that's something that we need examples out there where this approach to open data is working properly. One of the things that I was hoping, or where I come from in being interested in DART, is in thinking about the reliability of our knowledge base. And working as an aerial surveyor, I run the Royal Commission's aerial survey programme. I'm only too aware of, first of all, the limitations of my sensors, my own ability to see, only recording in visual, and also dependent on horribly unreliable weather and formation processes, which I understand currently in a very general way. So, I mean, one of the things that Ant promised me, I think, was that at the end of year 3, I would be able to order a spectral survey the whole of Scotland that was going to answer every question. And I think that is one of the answers that we're going to look at, or one of the answers that we look for in the future. But my starting point is that most archaeological distributions are very rarely reflecting what happened in the past. They more often reflect survey bias, land use issues, and so on. And that actually makes it very, very difficult for us to understand the past, but then also from a curatorial point of view, to make informed decisions as part of development control, or in terms of what's the protection, things like scheduling and so on. And I was going to stop with that, but just to kick off perhaps a discussion which I think we've had part one side of, which is about this issue of how do we address the reliability of our data. And I think part of the discussion this morning was really, or earlier, this morning it was just after lunch, earlier, was about how commercial contractors might, not be honest, that's the wrong way of putting it, but might be able to put commentaries on the reliability of their information. This survey was done at the wrong time. The information is likely to be poor. And if I could ask perhaps reaction from the contractors, first of all about what something like DART has got, what role it's got, or the results have got, in terms of making for more informed curators. Because at the end of the day, I guess as a contractor, if you say, I don't actually think it's a good idea to do this survey now, someone else will do it. And that's bad news, because you need to make a living.
Could I jump right in there? One thing to be clear here is that contractors do not have contact with creators on the majority of jobs. Because the client, the archaeological client, the archaeologist will get in the way. And there are many archaeologists out there who do not want their specialists to talk to the creators in case we win their clients. Which means we're immediately on the back foot. We may know better, we may be able to prove it, but we still can't actually do anything about it in real terms. Unless we persuade our archaeological client, it's worth them going back to the creator and passing on in their own words what the problem is. Now that's getting a very long way from the problem at the end of the day. And this, I think, is a real problem with DART. The research will be absolutely fantastic. But how do we actually educate people who need to make the decisions and guide the whole process that the rest of us work in? And that, of course, is the creators. It's not the contractors, it's not actually many operational archaeologists, it's council people.
Perhaps if you ask CAT, to what degree do you, in letting or designing the spec for contracts, consider these kinds of issues? Are you asking for it at the right time of year? Are you aware enough of the sensor and detection issues in order to design a project specification that is going to produce reliable information?
Well, there's very much to think on that, as I was about to say, not everybody specifies. I don't work on a project that I've written that didn't actually specify the thing like the technique. What it said was, this is the area, this is the soil type, these are the constraints in terms of timing, ecology. You tell me, and quote, what is the best thing. So what we're actually asking for is a mini project design, you know.
I think you were tending towards resistivity, and I pushed you towards magnetometry.
Yeah,
But we ended up doing both.
So. But the point is, when they came back, when the quotes came back, because the client is the farmer actually commissions the survey, pays for it, and then we grant aid that back. So it's a very complicated system, because I've written a brief. If there are any technical questions, then that's me. And I will also give a recommendation on the project designs and come back and say, this is as close as I can come to a like-for-like analysis of these quotes, and I'm saying that one's not going to work because of my technical knowledge. I know that's not going to work. These two will work, and that's the cheapest of the two that will work. I would go with this one, and 90% of the time, unless the contractor's peeing them off on the site visit, they'll go, yeah, all right, then we'll hire that one. So I deliberately put that flexibility in because I know that although I have a generic knowledge of geophysics, I'm not a contracting geophysicist, and I want to draw on the expertise of the people that are quoting. On the converse, having been an archaeological fieldwork in the past and a project officer in excavation, I know that you sometimes, county archaeologists do spec. They don't ask you what you think is the best design for something. They tell you to do X, Y, and Z, and then when something comes up that's unexpected, they try and change the design halfway through without telling the client. So one of the reasons why, if you're working for a developer, the developer doesn't want you to speak to the curator directly, is because the curator quite often changes the project, which will up the cost. So you have to go back and say, well, the curator has now said, seems as we've found such and such, can we do an extra 3 weeks work, by the way, that will cost you £2 extra or whatever. Do you see what I mean? So it is complicated. You can write a brief to draw on that specialist information, but it's not the way it's normally done.
In terms of wanting the best outcome, what would be the best system? Having a curator write a generic brief saying, these are the sort of conditions that we know about the site, and usually they don't have that information. Usually it's, here's 24 hectares of pasture, I want the survey, give me a bid. Or would it be better to go through an archaeological consultant? And this is where your problem was, is that, I mean, in order to get the best option, best outcome in terms of information, what is the best way to seek that information?
Because I think the way that we spec it, in a sense, than actually an in-house archaeologist, is a bit like a cross between a consultant and a curator, because we're effectively doing a DBA on our in-house systems, typing the site in, looking at the various constraints. We've not only got designated sites, we've also got a selected subsection of HER sites that we can see in-house with advice from the HERs. So we're looking at it and going, right, okay, these are our constraints, this is roughly where we want to go with this, but we will take advice from the contractor. Not everybody has got that facility.
I was just thinking about this, and these are different procedures, and all have problems, there's problems for you. Not wishing to simplify it, but I think in those different scenarios it's possible to see where the outcomes of these dark projects should go in. It's at the point where the site specification is drawn up. Whether it gets carried through as you wanted is another matter. But you can see the technical specification point. That's where this data, this
When
research
James
ought to
was
contribute.
saying, if he interpreted the Dart data, where would it then go? Would it go back into Dart? My answer to that would have been it goes to the HER.
Yeah.
Because in the HER summarises that to all the other people, the contractors can access it, curators can access it. We then incorporate that information into our specs or briefs, whatever you want to call them. So that is the core nexus of information. But it does have constraints in that. I mean, I was talking to Ant about this earlier. I asked for raw data to be put into the HCR as well, rather than just this filtered report. But a lot of people don't do that.
And that does. Sorry.
No, one of the things that we're perhaps skipping over is that, as far as I'm aware, there's such thing as a standard brief for this of the development control work. And I stick to I suppose the East Anglia region, and even within that, the briefs from the counties are slightly different in their forms of information that they provide.
Well, Algeo does have a set model brief.
Is there? Yeah.
That is available for download on my website, and most Algeo members will start from that starting point and then elaborate on it.
Okay, so these are the modifications.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Can I just change the tack a little bit? Because I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the soup order earlier on, and I'm going to draw upon some of the results from DART and from one of the questions that came out from our first workshop and what we did about it. And I'm very struck by some of Rob's data. And the two things that really stand out amongst all the different probe separations. One is that if you had to just choose a probe separation that would work, you might choose something that was 25 centimetres, probe separation of 25 centimetres, proved incredibly reliable over the ditches. 25 centimetre probe separation does not see deeply enough to look at those ditches. Okay, actually, if you're thinking about what you're going to choose, we do have this discussion about half metre, 1 metre separations. Well, actually, one that doesn't go into the archaeology was as good as perhaps the half metre one. Okay, that was the first thing that occurred to me from the data. And the other one was that a lot of the information is also that doesn't change, is locked very deeply into the bottom parts of the ditch, and that was shown by Dan's data, and as well as the analysis of Rob. Now, that's quite they're two problematic areas, because you've got something that's changing very rapidly, but it's changing due to what's beneath the ground, and also something that's quite deeply buried. Okay? At the previous workshop, Martin and Anne asked particular questions about EM systems, okay, and said, wouldn't it be great if you look at this problem? Well, we did look at using a contactless way of estimating the conductivity of the soil. And we bought a system that looked at 3 different depths. And it looks at 3 different depths, approximately going down so half a metre down to about 1.5 metres in depth. And the instrument gives you the electrical conductivity and also the magnetic properties of the soil at those 3 depths. Now, one of the things that we found there was that it was a good estimator of the conductivity as was seen by Rob's resistance surveys, but we also took it on to plenty of other sites. And because we've got 6 layers of 6 layers of information, what we found was that we actually saw the archaeology in one of these channels on every single site. Okay?
didn't have to make a choice between whether you look at the small separation or a large separation, or whether you looked at resistance or you looked at magnetometry. Okay? It's somewhere within these data sets the archaeology was captured. Now we were on sites. Okay? We weren't going blind, but in terms of what we knew was there, we felt we could find it. Okay? That's for development control. That's something that's worth listening to. The other thing was we used this instrument over in Ireland. Now Ireland doesn't have seasonality. They think they haven't got seasonality, but they do actually. And in fact, James Bonsall, a research student at our university, who's doing an assessment of the National Roads Authority archive, who has gone back on some sites and doing novel testing. He did seasonality, and what happens is in Ireland, this was wet, very dry, wet. Okay, so even James said, well, there's no seasonality. Well, actually, just on certain times of the year, the ground is so hard you cannot take resistance measurements. Okay, what he found was that using the EM system, he could still measure the contrasts that were deeply buried in the ditch, even though the subsurface was so dry that you couldn't take conventional resistance measurements. So again, from a development control, the new family of instruments that are coming along, these EM instruments, actually might take out some of the guesswork that we have as contractors. I'm not saying that the instrument that we used was, is the real deal, but the fact is that I think that we've used earth resistance and ERT specifically to try and answer the questions in DART. Okay? But the questions in DART were about what was happening with the moisture, what was happening down that section. They illustrated some of the problems that we have in the day-to-day use of earth resistance, but actually what DART gave us was the opportunity to look at different instruments that might well be pointless in a more efficient use of geophysics in the future.
So, from a curatorial perspective, what you're normally looking at when you're trying to look at features and landscapes is character of archaeology, extent of archaeology, significance of archaeology. And I think with EM, you get a really good idea of its extent, i.e. there's something there, we don't really know what it is. And what you can't do is then assess how significant it is because you don't have a clear understanding of the character. Now, if you
why not? Well, I don't understand that. I think you may well be basing that on old instrumentation and methods.
Yeah, so if you can get that, then obviously everybody would be overjoyed to find out. But I mean, it depends what resolution you're.
Well, the large separation and therefore resolution is on the map. The new versions have been used to map pits, ditches.
Are you talking about like an unmapped part, I suppose?
Sorry?
Unmapped part as opposed to like the
the instruments themselves are active instruments and cannot be pulled at high speed. But these instruments can be handheld in the same way as a magnetometer. But the instruments have been used particularly for looking at paleo landscapes in the very near past, and are now used on conventional targets that you'd see for our budget purposes.
I don't know if I could chip in there, but isn't what you just raised partially the point, in that it's the remote sensing techniques aren't just about prospecting for features and bits and bobs. It's also to inform the decision-making process. and to look at areas where we can look at changes in risk to any underlying archaeology. Just knowing that something has been taken out of pasture, for example, means that, you know, if there is subsurface stuff there, it's likely to now be in a different risk category. Does that in its own right trigger a different kind of intervention or management process? So some of these things can happen beyond the scale of actually finding stuff. You know, we're currently focused very much on improving the way we detect, you know, the features, whereas technology is coming on stream that allow us to deal with that kind of broader change in risk and designation. Can that potentially have impact within that kind of curatorial and decision-making process?
When we're looking at proactive management, where we have value-driven criteria, and so basically, payment for arable diversion is expensive, and farmers don't want to do it because they will actually probably, in a good year, earn more from the crop than they get from environment payment. So it's used in small settings, you know, you might put a parcel of a field in or a small field in, and you have to target that on things that you are either of highest significance or at greatest risk, which is what the cosmic assessment is all about, working out which things are at highest risk so that we can then target those for proactive management. If you try to if you scan the whole country quickly with an EM thing, you will find so much archaeology that every single arable farmer in the country will go out of business, I would say. So you have to look at risk and significance to decide which bits you're going to actively protect to a high level, which bits you're going to mitigate damage on or accept limited damage, and which bits are going to be left alone.
Yeah, then in that respect then is scheduling, for example, the appropriate mechanism to use in these kind of environments when, you know, you could be talking about essentially taking elements of the landscape out of its productive process. Can't we, you know, we're potentially entering again into an area where we can be much more nuanced and subtle in our approaches for protection. If we can tie into some of the precision agriculture techniques and have heritage potential maps underpinning the data that's being streamed through into the cab of the tractor or the combine harvester, which could say, raise the plough in this, or raise a share in this vicinity by a few centimetres, and then drop it again, because our underlying significance map says there's a thing. So it's no great change in the process. You just carry on and do your stuff. Your equipment automates what you do. And so you can start to work with the land manager on dealing with techniques that ameliorate the problem of preservation in situ, while at the same time allow the farmer or the land manager to do whatever it is they're going to do on their land.
We'll get that. We'll find a lot of people who won't go to precision farming because of the increased weed burden and the implications that's got for things. So there are other factors going on within agriculture that mean they have to balance what they're going to do. And you get some farmers who are very much about stewardship and conservation, and they would be mortified at the idea that there was actually an archaeological site. And then you have, at the opposite end of that spectrum, and it is a spectrum, you have your agribusiness who are all about making profit from their land. And working in curatorial archaeology in a rural context, and funny enough, we sort of keep mentioning development control, but actually the sort of remote sensing that we're talking about doesn't really happen in development control urban environments. It happens in the rural sector, which is where you've got a lot less influence from planning. You're more likely to have EIA regs or agri-environment derogations and controls being the curatorial mechanism on a site where you do geophysics than development.
I think we're just buzzing. I think we're going a little off topic because naturally, in all due respect, is probably less than 1% of any geophysical survey done in this country. Your experience is not typical.
No, but we are about 80% of rural land.
Yeah, but we're talking here about the geophysical surveys undertaken, not farmers putting land or not into stewardship. Now, most of the survey undertakings, or most of the things that we're interested in, are actually development control. And we're talking there about major house building companies who may already own the land, even though they're the tenant farmers farming it, who want to build on it. It's not a question of mitigating risk. It's about finding out what's there so it can be entrenched, so the whole lot can then be evaluated and properly destroyed. That is actually the reality of most of the work we're involved with. So
I think it's both. You know, from a commercial geophysics basis, that may be that's where your contracts are coming from. But there is also the bigger picture of what's going on at the national level, and both are I think both are equally valid.
Okay, I mean, Chris is wanting to move things along into the next session because we're out of time. But I think that there is a question here in how does the headline outcomes of something like the Dark Project, particularly as we've been labouring under Chris's stewardship on the geophysical side, how do you embed, how do you communicate that to Algeo? Is DART going to produce a idiot's guide to thinking about how you embed geophysical survey in the project design? Are you going to produce a guidance for Algeo local councils saying these are the kinds of issues, this project's happened, here is a side of A4 expressed in simple terms about what we think you should know. And by the way, I hope you've got a copy of Arnold's guidelines on your shelf. Because actually otherwise there's a dislocation between the results of the research, which is absolutely fundamental, which is going to come through into the contractors that can be bothered to take an interest. The ones that aren't here are going to remain uninformed and pick up stuff down the line. And it's a key question about how you embed the results of a research project like this in routine practice.
I think that can be answered quickly enough on a straw poll as to whether, from what people have seen to date, is worthy of being written up in or synthesised in a form which should be sent to Algeo initially. Or probably a raise of hands on that one. Do you think it's worthwhile summarising what we've done and pushing it through to?
What we need to do is discuss with Algeo. If you think that the parameters that have been identified by DART are critical to informing a best option, best outcome survey, then Algeo need to know that if they issue a brief, they have to give soil conditions and access and land use, etc. And that is the sort of thing that would be useful, because otherwise they will issue a brief saying, I have 25 hectares for a housing estate on pasture, tell me if there's anything there.
In that case, the other issue associated with how's it funded? We can write this into the follow-on fund to do that, or we can ask Algeo for the limited amount of cost it will be to actually translate that. But by the looks of it, if it wants to happen, we can attempt to make it happen. Yeah.
There needs to be more information in general coming out of university research into the commercial sphere. And unless it's not just creators, it's all archaeologists, unless there's a general awareness, an increased awareness of what problems we face and what we need, no one's going to benefit. More publication, good. Has to be.
That's a good pragmatic outcome.
I think though the issue there is, I mean, the difference between publications in a one side of A4. I mean, how do we translate what's essentially three PhDs, into one page? If anybody could do that, please. Oh, you've got an answer.
It's voluntary. Maybe a rubbish answer. I know you pulled out, but to what extent can you do something like a decision-making tree? I mean, that would be ideal. I suspect you won't get very far down the decision-making tree.
We have there's too much uncertainty, I think, to go for this, to get back to the phrase you hate there, Dave, the Uber model. But we do have...
Even a sort of a few branches of decision-making tree might be useful. You can show how far you can make some decisions without going. I'm not suggesting you could get all the way down to the detail.
But this is crucial to DART demonstrating impact. And Armin is leading on the production of some pan-European guidelines for geophysical survey, which draw very heavily on the existing EH ones. And the
With
point...
a notable exception that I've thrown out all the decision-making trees.
You see, there is the question.
Exactly, that's right. Question. Yeah, that's right.
They should
so
ask.
the new guidelines has the subtitle questions you should ask.
Absolutely. Okay. Sorry,
Because the problem with the English Heritage Guidelines so far is that there is a table in there saying if you are looking for, let's say, graves, you use a magnetometer, and that is very dangerous.
Yeah.
And therefore the focus has to be different.
It needs the question. Phrasing the question, right? It would be very useful.
Can I come in on those guidelines? Because I've lost work because of those guidelines. because they are guidelines, and you can put forward proposals which will give you much more than the basic guidelines. But a lot of contractors don't want to listen to that. They'll say, look, here in the guidelines it says you only have to do this, and so that's what I'm going to pay for. So it's dangerous, I think, to produce something that people are going to point back to and say, well, no, hang on a minute. You can't go down that route because this says this. So you have to be careful you don't constrain yourself too far that way.
Yeah, I mean,
what won't be done for, but you have the curators use it.
Yeah, but the greatest impact would be if we said this is what you have to do. You know, but I think that is actually wrong. You know, I mean, it is wrong because we know there's nuanced approaches that we've got to have dependent upon the locality, and in particular archaeology, the soil background, you know, and actually in some ways the weather history might be the least of our problems. Might be. Okay. Okay.
When we talk about Algeo, just to step back a step, and the contractors are basically saying, if it's not going to work, we'll lose out on the job. I know from back surveys, a planning officer will reject any back survey that took place after September because it's not fit for purpose. If you could distill everything to Algeo and say there's no point doing it in X period or in any substantial downpour, whoever was talking about surveying in snow, that should have been rejected as an invalid.
It's providing constraints in a useful and reusable manner.
Precisely, so that they can say to the developer, you haven't fulfilled your planning permission, you were conditioned to provide a geophysical survey or field evaluation that was valid, you commissioned it at an invalid time of year, therefore you've got to commission another one at the right time of year because it's still not fulfilled your condition.
There's a problem here, though. It's very easy to end up being prescriptive, which is one of the problems about standards, because it's about you shall do this, that, and it doesn't work in the real world. It's undesirable, which is why things tend to go guidelines. But I think even if you sent Rob one of Rob's slides with the differential visibility to the Algeo newsletter, with have this discussion with your geophysical contractor, because actually it's partly about teaching. Well, okay, about whatever the method. They may not be able to do that in the current framework, but part of the point of what we should be trying to do with these kind of potential improvements and generation of best practice is trying to break down some of these things. And those decision makers, whether they're the people like European Heritage Council at a really top level, or a county archaeologist or planning department, we need to think about mechanisms to get little bits of additional information that are crucial to decision making into all those scenarios. That's why I'm just coming back to it about that is the way that the DART outputs that we've heard about today can inform things really in quite a dramatic way. big impact.
Okay, let's just stop there for a minute, because no, possibly 3 or 4 minutes to get a cup of tea and have a quick break, and we'll come back refreshed. Ready for the Jim and John. Okay, we're going to move on to some of the impact in the community area, and how our work links in with vulnerable groups. Is that right? Something like that?
Well, theoretically, the situation at present, obviously, is in terms of community groups. We're at a stage where nothing can really be applied as yet. We want simple indications as to what are the best things to actually do. I've been given leeway by Anne to talk a little bit about West Lothian archaeology. To give you an idea of where we've sprung up from and what we actually do. There's a misconception that West Lothian Archaeology Group is a local group, West Lothian. We're not, we're actually a collective, a national collective. And we split into various sub-bodies within the general title. It all started, I have absolutely no background in archaeology. I was a research scientist at Bartlett Nuclear Laboratories in Gloucestershire. I lived there for 29 years, and I moved to Scotland in 2004 with my wife. In 2006 we set up the local community and heritage website, and we thought, what's the best way of actually taking reasonable photographs of an old mining town? And we thought, my wife used to fly kites and used to make them with her school children, and I've always liked photography, so we flew cameras on kites. And we started to look at the archaeology in West Lothian and found that West Lothian Council traditionally was something of a pariah in the archaeology community. And we found sites, Roman sites, that had housing estates built on them with nothing actually done before the estate was built. We found that in our local town we had a mill, a 3-storey water mill, that was predates the town, and it wasn't on the Sites and Monuments record. And we saw these things and thought it was absolutely amazing. And suddenly, I and my wife became interested in archaeology. So in 2010, we'd met this chap here wandering the fields when we were doing a survey, and Jim is an archaeologist, or should I say an archaeological scientist trained at Bradford, and then did a master's in computing there. And we were flying a kite with a camera on, we let Jim have a go, we managed to get it back off him after about half an hour. And we decided in 2010 at the beginning we would form the West Lothian Archaeology Group, which was myself, my wife and Jim. And we set up a big backing group called the West Lothian Archaeology Forum, with individuals that were experts in ancient roads, myth and mystery relating to West Lothian, just about everything, even bricklayers that were in their 80s, who could give us a good indication about the town. And that seemed to progress fairly well, but we found that people were wanting to join the group that were based all through the country that were specialists in archaeological kite aerial photography. So now we have several PhDs that are members of our group whose work, David Stott's a member of the group, but we have Kieran Baxter in Dundee, whose PhD is based on kite aerial photography, and Susie Green as far south as London, and people in between. When my wife discovered that she was dying last year, we decided to set up a trust. So the core 3 members, Jim, myself and my wife, set up the West Lothian Archaeological Trust. And we just continued from there. When towards the end of last year, when my wife realised she hadn't got much longer to live, she said, we need to get our act together. We've been working for 5 years together. We've been visiting groups up and down the country, showing them how to take aerial photographs on the cheap, in the visible and near infrared. No one else seemed to be taking up or taking very much interest, and we just couldn't understand. You could put kits together for £70 for working in the near infrared. You could do original research, cheaply. Primary school children could use the kits. The age range we've had using the kits are from 2.5 years old to 89. So my wife said, when I'm gone, use some of my money, set up a Scottish National Aerial Photography Scheme and give away kits. So what we've done is, she said, do a very simple kit that can be used in primary school, so a coat hanger wire, you can put it on a kite line like that, it can move around, that bit doesn't move very much. You can stick it on a HD video camera, you can just stick it on, there's a safety line. This costs £28, the actual camera. You can convert it for use at 30 nanometers for an extra £7. You've got a very cheap system. That goes to primary schools for them working mainly in the visible, but they're just starting to work in the near infrared. The other kit that we give away, we've given away about 30 of these since May. The other kit we give away is a more standard kit like this. And the thing is about a kite, people have this misconception that kites are difficult to fly. They have this idea of kids running along when they're young and having to run to keep them up. If you get a kite from this side upwards, you put it up into the air, it flies and it just stays there. There's no problem. If it's a gusty wind, just stick a big tail on it, it stays there. And you've essentially got a washing line at an angle, and you can just walk along this line and put your washing on. And the kite can go up and down, and this just self-levels. You can point it in any direction to take your photos. You can work very cheaply from the near ultraviolet through to the near infrared. If you've got a fair amount of cash to spend, you can stick a thermal camera on there. So that's the basic technique. When you have a scheme like that, it's very good in terms of looking across the full spectrum. But community groups can't afford to look across a full spectrum. In fact, in many places within the spectrum, you need equipment that you can buy cheaply and that's easy to use. And certainly working in the near ultraviolet, which is probably only good for excavated sites, but there's a lot of work being done there. But the visible spectrum, the near infrared, definitely of use. We've shown it's in use. And with the, as I mentioned before, with the price of thermal images coming down in the near future, there's a lot of potential there. And all the basic work in terms of thermal imaging of crop marks, thermal crop marks, is actually there from the past 8, 9, 10 years. So that's just a very quick run through, and I'm sure you'll have questions. In terms of the dark work, it's all a little bit too complicated in the way it's presented at present to be of any use for a normal community group. Most community groups really just want to go out there, dig a hole and find something. Because of time team, you have them going out there now, obviously with soil resistance meters, mainly through the CIA and the ones that cost £1,000. We bought ours from MM Instruments for £530, so we got them much cheaper. We have also a radiometer as well. But the easiest way for any community group to get into remote sensing is via kite aerial photography. Basic kit about £70, the standard kit about £250. And ultimately, if you want to start doing higher resolution pictures, which really are not needed, don't forget with that, you're talking about a much higher resolution than you get with geophysics. You can go on to using something like a Sony with a wide-angle lens on it, a fisheye lens. And these sort of fisheye lenses now you can buy for just over £200, and they compare with ones you can pay £1,500 for in terms of resolution, even at full aperture. The technique is very, very simple and relatively cheap. So the information we want in terms of what can be applied to the community in terms of aerial photography is what are the best situations in relation to visible, near infrared, and ultimately thermal infrared. I don't know if you've any comments about geophysics.
In general, no. Because I remember when we came last time, we were talking about guidelines, and I think it's already been covered already. So that's fine from that aspect.
So at that point, I'll throw it open for anyone that wants questions.
Would anybody like to ask some questions on the surveys, and how this might blend back into these bigger issues that we're having?
Sorry, that's what I do. I mean, I know one of the other things that you use is, or are looking using is UAVs. Now, I've for a long time felt that, you know, as much as I like UAVs and enjoy crashing them to the sides of vans,
well, I must just point out, I actually did drive up to me in the field at that point and stopped within a few feet, plodding under the brake. And,
it was great. I was doing fine until I was scared. But I see that kind of UAVs and the kind techniques that you've just been describing are potentially much more effective within community organisations, because I think there's difficulty within, you know, larger groups to actually deploy them effectively. I think community groups are much more agile and can move into places which is difficult for other organisations to do. How would that? Are there ways in which, you know, those kind of things can be supported in addition to the stuff you're doing?
Well, first of all, I'd say that I personally, and I think Jim would probably agree, I don't see UAVs for use in a community context. When you have a technique in a community context, like with soil resistance measurements, it's usually just one or two people within the group that have the expertise to do it. You'll have people walking up and down, taking their turn, but in terms of analysing it, it's just one or two people. You want techniques that are inclusive for everybody. You can't have, as we have, 2.5-year-olds to 89-year-olds generally flying UAVs, but they can fly kites. Jim's daughter's 12, and she flies what is essentially is a £600 rig with a kite that costs about £100, so over £700. She's totally competent in doing that, absolutely no problem at all. So, you know, the sort of age where you can, you know, actually manage these things in the field is you know, end of primary school, beginning of secondary school. Sorry?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, do something. I can come in there again.
Well, I mean, sorry, I was just actually just picking up the point Anne made about how community groups or local organisations can work as part of the kind of national strategy. I mean, we've had a slightly, it's been a bit of a disaster really, hasn't it? I mean, we've got a scheme where there's a complex of Roman monuments near Falkirk, and the idea was that we would record it all the way through from bearer through to post-harvest, with Jim and John doing kite work. I've got a rig with a digital SLR and a converted near-infrared DSLR. I photographed every time we went over. We would create a multi-temporal data set of near-infrared, raw photography, and thermal imaging that would allow us to think about issues of visibility and repair on things like deploying up spectrum. So, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, we'll get it like next year. Like airplane growth at that time this year and the year before we had a cooling summer. But from my point of view, I've got a national remit. I can't concentrate on West Lothian. So I'm doing things in a very, very coarse grain resolution, but I need the detailed information of multiple episodes of photography to inform my practice overall. And this, hopefully, once we get it working, is going to be the mechanism that will be through into that. And if I could have half a dozen people dotted around the country, it would make a significant difference to the way I undertake my prospection, because instead of relying on generic things like the soil moisture deficit figures, I would have a local expert who has talked to the farmer and knows what the crops are doing and can pop out on a sunny afternoon when I'm not able to get out. So, that's
Yes.
science. It's incredibly useful information.
And that's why in May of this year we set up what we call the Scottish National Area Photography Scheme. It's turning out that it's actually including England and Ireland as well, and also there's one person in Portugal. And we're donating these kits as part of the scheme. It's very difficult, specifically getting kits to local archaeology groups. And we're finding that the best way to do it isn't actually by going out and us flying with them. We go and then we go away and they seem to forget about it. So one of the things that we decided was, as well as giving the kits to schools, we'd target people in national organisations. So we found individuals in the Royal Commission, Historic Scotland, National Museums of Scotland, the National Trust for Scotland, and universities. And we said to them, do you work with children? They said yes. Or do you work with students? Yes. Do you work with local communities? Yes. So we give them a standard kit. And we're already starting to get feedback from local groups. We've had people like Fraser Hunter go out from national museums with one of these kits and saying that they're getting very good images and they're sending them back. So we're not, I don't think initially we're going to have too much success directly with community groups until people of standing are seen to be using kite. There's a problem of professional credibility. There's this image that using a kite is a toy. It isn't, it's just a platform to hang a camera on. And that's very difficult. You can go out with groups, especially with any professionals there, and you can try handing them a kite. They will not take that kite off you, they will not take the lead. You can give it to a 5-year-old with hundreds of pounds of equipment on, they're quite happy to do it. We're having so much difficulty getting kits into schools, even locally, after years. And then there was this wonderful group, Bal Secondary School in Ireland, that presented a paper in Dublin. Anne was there as well, and David. And it was magic. In their interim year before going into what is effectively what we used to call the sixth form, they have a year where they can do what they want essentially, and they've instituted a remote sensing course. Absolutely flagship course, there's no other school like it in Europe. And we were part of that fairly early on by providing kites and cameras, in the plural. And that was great. This was published, it was on the internet, and I could go to West Lothian Council with this and wave it in their faces and saying, curriculum for excellence. And in no time at all, we started having the schools coming along. The first school we took out to a nature reserve and were flying invisible and near infrared. Once that school's images hit one of the national educational magazines front pages, things changed then. So just within the past 2 months, everything is changing. A beautiful quote from the girls. Yes?
Yeah, you seem to have very nearly solved the data collection problem. But there's another problem there, data analysis. What do you do with all this data once you've got it? And you're talking about multi-temporal sequences. I guess when you take a satellite, you know exactly where the satellite, but the plane is not quite so accurate, but you've got GPS and you kind of know what the flight path is. The kite is actually a lot less well located in space, isn't it? So does that actually increase the problem of analysis and also the skills to do whatever?
Well, there's no point putting in ground reference points.
No, well, you can put ground reference points in and then survey them in using GPS or traditional methods and then tie that together with auto rectification. If you're not doing that, well, it's anyway, like you say.
You've got to ask yourself why you're doing that. We initially started this simply to publicise the archaeology of West Lothian. So individuals and groups couldn't get away with some of the things they've been getting away with in the past. Fortunately, since 2004, the West of Scotland Archaeology Service acts as the archaeologist for West Lothian, and things have been infinitely better since then. So things are very good. But it's important for the local. We know locals who have gone away to university to study archaeology have no idea about the local archaeology at all. And so it was initially diversified. The Trust also wants to publicise kite aerial photography and any other techniques that we deem appropriate. We don't deem unmanned aerial vehicles as appropriate for community groups, primarily because of safety and this inclusivity. It's possible that some of the very small UAVs will carry the 18-gram weight camera that we've got, and we will be looking into that.
Can I come back on that? I admire everything you do with the kites and with the communities, but I think you're dismissing UAVs a little bit too quickly, because I've seen them where you could just take a suitcase out, stick them in the field and program in a flight path.
Oh, we've got them.
And you could do
we've got
that.
large ones, we've got numerous types.
But you could then do your multi-temporal stuff because they are all GPS enabled, and you don't have to do the auto rectification because there's software that will do that for you, and then you can guarantee you're looking at exactly the same point in space every time.
Yes, I mean, we could go to Correc and buy a £20,000 cheap UAV by their standards. You can do all these sort of things. It's all about cheapness and getting people to do these things initially. Everything else can theoretically follow on, and you could have people using UAVs, but not everybody can do it. You'd have someone specialising it within the group. We want everyone within a class, within a school, within a community group to actually be able to use the techniques.
I take your point there, but I just don't want to throw out UAVs completely, because I think there is a definite place for them in remote sensing.
Can I just say on that, it'll be licensed in years to come, where you'll have to go and study for a licence, wherever that will be, and that's going to cost a lot of money.
The important point about techniques like UAVs, we don't dismiss any. It's the context in which you're using them. And people used to think that when I was going on about the resolution from these really cheap cameras being so much better and so much higher than the geophysical techniques, that for some reason I was saying that the geophysical techniques are not appropriate. Everything's appropriate. Within archaeology, use every technique that you can, but community groups can't afford everything.
I just wanted to ask you, you say you've got better success with building groups that are with longevity if they've got a key member in place who kind of is a placeholder for that group. Have you tried, I don't know if they have nature improvement areas in Scotland, but you will have a leader as well.
Yeah.
Have you tried those people, and how's that working?
Well, it's various ranges in whatever sort of communities they're working with, so it could be trees or looking at mosses or something. They're using them. What's the guys at the beach? Is that in TS?
Well, that's North Ayrshire. In terms of wider use, we only just this past few months, our local agricultural college, which runs a leader programme and also a Rural Connect Through leader, they see this as potentially they actually have one of our starter kits for using within their scheme. But they jumped on the bandwagon and said, well, if you're putting these kits out to school, would it be good to follow on with formal instruction to teachers on aerial photography in a broad context? And the answer was yes. We had a meeting. We've appointed a local schools liaison who's a retired teacher. And within the next few months, we hope to have courses running within West Lothian for teachers paid for through the council.
Because I have to say, I rate the sort of Scotland's Rural Past website really quite a lot of community archaeology. It's better than the resources that we have in England. So I tend to say, apart from the bit about where you send stuff, look at that website first.
Yes, and Brian Wilkinson was one of the people working on Scotland's Rural Past, one of the people employed by the Royal Commission. He's now working for the Royal Commission's Britain from Above. He's a recipient of both the standard and the starter kit because he's working as an activities officer with Britain from Above and filming out there. And all these groups that receive kits, if you go through to the Scottish National Aerial Photography Scheme's website, you'll see all the pictures are just starting to appear as they're actually feeding back what they're actually doing. So if anybody just Googles West Lothian archaeology, you'll find an access into everything that we're doing. We feel this.
I really like your presentation. As an engineer, I think have you considered using smartphones for this? Because you've got an infrared camera, you've got a GPS, and you've got a Bluetooth, so you could do everything.
Smartphones are used fairly widely.
Yeah.
There's no problem with GPS. You probably also the Horizon program, where they have cats going around with GPSs on, and also have cameras on them. Actually, some of the cameras that we modified were ones from us because they had 2 or 3 days deadline filming, and they damaged 5 of the cameras, changing the angle of the lens, and they couldn't wait for the more to come through from China. So they looked up A2A HD camera, found us on the website, and asked us to supply extra cameras for them to work with. The GPSs they work with, you can get them that size. They cost about £36, and you can fly those if you want to. I actually gave one to my daughter so she could attach it to her cat's collar. So as it wanders around Pagan Hill near Stroud in Gloucestershire, she can see exactly where her cat goes. You can do the same with kites.
Okay, as part of this, John has also very kindly donated us 3 starter kits to give away. Hence, why I have a piece of paper, and to show that there is no bias in any of this.
Yeah.
There's always a random number generation.
It's 15 and 14 now. Is that random?
It is. yes, it is. And 15, 14, and 5 are Elaine, bonus, Carmen, and Hannah. Come later again, please. Oh, come on.
Together.
Good luck in getting that through customs. But that'll look well on the map. It's going to Greece. Excellent. We better move on to the next section. Can we just hold on for a couple of seconds with this, because it comes back to the throwaway that I chucked out this morning or whenever, about those kits for people, and what David just said about the usefulness of having somebody on the spot who is taking aerial photographs weekly, monthly, but throughout the year. If you've got a level of soil data at the same time, this might be giving useful information. It's a matter of getting pros to the factor. And then it comes back to the point that was made earlier about having somebody to analyse the data and make sense of what's coming out. But there's the beginning of a much wider experiment.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think basically what we potentially are seeing is the framework that DART's put in place. You know, we've got, you know, we've done some of the harder parts. We've done a lot of the initial groundwork. We know what we now need is to see whether the sorts of responses are replicated elsewhere and with the same time frame. So I think given the fact that, for example, these guys have already got a network where you talk to people and basically, you know, presumably what happens is that they people who are very interested in their own areas, they're interested in actually contributing more, you know, finding the problem where they can actually contribute. You know, I think this could be it. You know, basically we could have a long-term project in place.
What we're finding is it's not simply the people on the archaeology side. In fact, the archaeology side is slower than the environmental side. So we had someone come from the RSPB for work on the Forth Valley project in the Valley of North Ayrshire and launching kits. They went away with 3 or 4 kits, I think.
I think, you know, there's still deep down there is this sort of dichotomy between collecting data and analysing and understanding. I think that's actually the obstacle that one or two you've got to try and get over. I mean, I mean, although it's not that long since people have really taken on board geophysics in a sense, you know. I mean, it's I was in a pub one day, not that long ago. And somebody asked me what I did, and they said, "Oh, this geophysics. So you believe in it, do you?"
Brilliant. Thing that Canine Prospects community group that's actually, I think, they've finished yet, but they're still doing it. But they were writing protocols for community groups to interpret archaeology based on Google Earth images. So if you could extend that to kite imagery, you might have a way for people to get trained up to do interpretation.
Yes, there's a kite aerial photographer come surveyor called Bill Blurd in the Midlands, and it was still groups based on Google, but it was tying it in with kite aerial photography as well.
So it's out there.
There are so many different things that you can bring together, but you just need to get community groups with a technique they can use. Another thing that's happening with community groups is that there's now, both on the ground and in the air, but mainly on the ground, starting to merge their images and put them into photoscan for making virtual 3D models with absolutely no background before they actually start. Someone comes in and says, "This is how you do it." It's relatively simple. So what we're going to see ultimately from these aerial images that we're doing, because they're low level and we can get very good angles around sites, is they'll be able to produce 3D models.
Okay, we're going to have to stop there, I'm afraid, because we've got, we're a little bit behind.
It's the light entertainment.
Bob. Bob is the Toby show.
You see how it's good on it? Yes,
I seem to have killed.
I'm not an archaeologist, I found out that very quickly. Ant asked me to talk about building bridges and establishing effective collaboration networks. I found that quite difficult because it's a bit, what's the length of a piece of string? So I've got one quick slide which tells you who I might want to collaborate with, and I'm going to have some personal thoughts. And they have nothing to do with archaeology, I'm sorry about this. But I'm better known for work on soil erosion and runoff and agricultural diffuse pollution these days. So that's what you're going to get. Right. And if I can hit this, there we go. If you're going to build bridges though, do the people on the other side actually want to speak to you? This has come up quite a bit. In fact, we've just had quite a lot of it from, okay? But who would I want to speak to? Well, there will be people in agriculture, soils and hydrology. And I speak to quite a lot of them as it is, and I can tell you it takes a bloody long while to get them interested. I've also been a collector of data, and I analyse it. Okay? So I'm a fairly rare person in that way. The other thing is, I'm really a field observer. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not a great technician or anything like that. But I like going out in the field. I used to be a soil surveyor a long time ago, and my first job was to explain what you could see on aerial photographs and why you could see it. And it's the understanding that's always driven me and why it's been really good to be part of DART. And I think DART might help me solve the problem. Sure, and I'll come to that in a minute. But I think you have to have the basic understanding. That's where I come from. I'm not really interested in lots of other things. If I think of something I want to understand it, I'll do something about it. So I talk to lots of people. It does depend whether they want to talk to you. And it's taken, in some cases, 25 years. So you need a dialogue, and you need to find out what they want. This is absolutely key. When I was in the soil survey, and after I was Thatcherised, the soil survey became something else. And thank God I wasn't in it. Anyway, they used to tell people, planners in particular, what they wanted, what they needed. If you're a planner, you need this. Now, they might have been right, but planners didn't actually want to know what they needed. They wanted to find out themselves and then go on to the soil survey or whomever and work together. And that's partly been happening. One of the great drawbacks of this has always been the availability of soil survey data. And this has come up time after time after time. So you need a dialogue and you need some common ground. After that, I go, Christ, what am I going to talk about? And Alan said, don't belong. Well, I had some points. This one is rather important to me, not to you, Robert. That's key, and this one you've been talking about most of the day. As I said, my first job was to understand what you saw in aerial photography. Okay. And there is nothing that has been said today that greatly changes the fact that deep soils grow deep, good crops, and shallow soils grow poor crops. So the deeper the soil you've got, the more available water it has. And if you know what the potential soil moisture deficit is, you can work out when crop patterns are going to start. And the reason that I was given this job was that at one point, in the 60s and the 70s, through almost the 80s, we were the biggest contractor of aerial photography in the country. And if you want to spend money on air photos, they have to be taken at the right time. If you don't take them, if you're not taken at the right time, you're wasting your money. You might as well just go and buy whatever's been taken. But for some areas, it was key. So these photographs here were taken probably in about 1965 or 66. Nothing's changed since then. And this one was taken by the committee, Cambridge University Committee for Aerial Photography, and as it's in a book published in 1983, that was probably taken in the 1970s as well. The pattern that you can see on here, taller growth over this deeper soil and this crack in the rock, is exactly what you're seeing here. Okay? So not a lot has changed in that case. However, what really interests me is, do the operation and transpiration occur at predicted rates? For instance, if you look at Math Technical Bulletin 1967, it tells you for each county in England or Wales what the amount of evapotranspiration is, and I'm using both, not just one, is in a month. And you can just divide that into days, and it's very easy, therefore, to work out a daily potential soil moisture deficit. You're not supposed to do this, but it works. Anyway, well, do constraints kick in, which is what you have with Morex, the toughest thing. I've had papers refused because I've refused to use Morex. This one, I could predict when crop patterns were coming in within about a couple of days. As I was saying to somebody earlier today, I got that farmer his rent reduced because he was charged for growing good yielding crops. His land was crap, he couldn't grow good yielding crops, and I could explain that. He got a rent reduce. There we go. So, can potential soil moisture deficit explain when runoff occurs and erosion, which is what I work on these days, when drains fall, and can you explain stream flow? Well, I think you probably can, but what I would really like the guys from DART to work out is whether the evaporation is constrained or not. Because if it isn't, I think we're well on the way to doing things. Now, if you think this is all pie in the sky, we have something called the Water Framework Directive, European Union, in which streams will have to meet certain qualities and they will not have to deteriorate. There are limits set to these. They're impossible. It will be a nightmare. Okay? Now then, nitrate is one of the problems here. Now, if you look at this one, you can see this nitrate flush coming through here. It came through here in November. Well, everybody says that nitrate comes through field drains. It's leached through the soil profile. The field drains didn't start running until here. I know, I was doing the field work. Okay? They might both have been working at the same time here. This was a very wet summer, 2004. Metaldehyde in rivers, you can't get rid of it. It is not possible to get rid of it. And if you have more than 0.1 microgram per litre, which is there, if you have more than that in your river, it's illegal.
You can't get rid of it. So Anglian Water, who provided me with this graph, thank you very much, wouldn't want to tell me what they're getting through the tap waters, because that would be a double fine. This is 24. This is, and what happens with this and with other pesticides? Well, this is a bit tell me how this is slug pellets. But what happens with this is that the farmers are told that they haven't to put herbicides on or slug pellets if the field drains are running. The field drains to be running before it comes through the system. So when does Anglian Water switch off its pumps to move the water from the river into a storage reservoir? It actually takes rather a long while from the time they had to break down. Just there. So the kind of thing that I'm talking about are quite important, not to you personally as archaeologists, possibly to what you think anyway. And it's something quite important to the things. So access to data. Nobody does this hardly at all. You got free access. Don't go to the Met Office. I get free access to data because I get employed to do jobs, fortunately, and people give it me for nothing. Otherwise I'm stuffed. It's got to be easy access. And if you're like me, I'm no technology. Christ, the standard stuff that you've been talking about today has been amazing. It has to be easily usable. That's it. Thank you.
Just carry on. Right, okay, I'll carry on. I'm Toby Mottram. I'm an agricultural engineer. If you want to sort of focus me in the map of the universe, I invented robot milking about 25 years ago. And ever since you take the human out of the milking pile, you've got to work out ways of monitoring the cow health. So wireless sensor systems is what I've been working on for 20 years. About 7 years ago, I was Thatcherised. So I set up my own company, and we manufacture down in Exeter a rumen telemetry system. That's something that goes inside a cow, measures pH, temperature, nitrates, whatever, and telemeters the data out to the farmers, the vets, or mostly the scientists. Last year, fortunately, I was asked by the Douglas Bomford Trust to take up the role of Professor in Agricultural Mechanisation, because for about 25 years we've had virtually no training of agricultural engineers, and they seemed to think I knew what I was doing. So my definition of agricultural engineering isn't metal bashing, making trailers or whatever. It's all about data, it's all about sensors, it's about wireless networks, which is kind of things that we were talking about here. So I didn't really have a plan, and didn't really brief me what he wanted to talk about. But one thing that happened last year was that one of my colleagues at the Royal said, oh, there's these guys out there with big boxes of instrumentation. We don't know what they do, but it's the DART project. So I've got involved, and Daniel's been down a couple of times, and we've stood up to our ankles in mud looking at boxes of electronics. I'm thinking, this is not the way to do this. In fact, I actually put in an expression of interest into the current NERC call for new technology and monitoring yesterday, where I think we should be developing very low cost things that you can just chuck down, they'll be wireless, they'll have sensors in them. If they get lost, they biodegrade, or they become what I call smart grit. That's just like the old ploughshares you find in hedges and so forth. It's just another thing that can be left in the environment without destroying it, because batteries do contain heavy metals. So I thought I'd just run through some of the issues I see in agriculture, which is going to have an impact in your area over the next few years, and some of which you've probably already hit upon already today. And I also have another acronym for Bob's collection. About 3 years ago, I was asked to do DEFRA's greenhouse gas coordination. We've got a very big set of projects monitoring the emissions, and in your area it's principally nitrous oxide that you'd be interested in. The initials I came across were water filled pore space, because the nitrous oxide emission is highly dependent on the amount of saturation within the soil. So clearly you can see all this coming together. And talking about that, and talking about data, DEFRA, we put a lot of effort into how do we make the data on which we build our national inventory of methane and nitrous oxide emissions, how do we make that available to the public for future validation and checks and so forth. It's all going into Freshwater Biological Association's archive, and I spent a year with the team arguing about how you describe data. Just within institutions that work in the same sector, they have different words to mean the same things when describing their experiments. It's a non-trivial exercise to get even scientists in a relatively cohesive cohort to actually use the same words. and computers are incredibly nitpicky about having the same word. So as you know, with databases, you can have 20 entries just because you put a comma in one place and not in another. So moving on into the issues in agriculture, sustainable intensification is absolutely high on the agenda now. That means we've got to produce more food from less land sources. There will probably be a movement away from grass towards arable because of the very low returns on beef and sheep. You'll see more high-value crops, which means there'll be more covered crops with more plastic, there'll be more tunnel systems, there'll be more animals inside, because we have this debate going on within the industry. If you go around the West Country now, you don't see many dairy cows outside. And some of that comes from straightforward biosecurity. The best way to keep the bloody badgers out of your feed is to put the cows in a shed. So this is one of the unintended consequences of the badger lovers, is that cows are now kept in sheds. We've got to reduce the emissions to soil and water. Bob mentioned the water directive. There's also a soils directive coming through, which will impact your work. And then moving on into what agriculture currently does, there's at least 3 times a year that we're collecting GPS data in agriculture. One's the agronomists who are going around once a month looking for hotspots, looking for plant growth, looking for soil moisture. So there are almost certainly commercially, but therefore not available, but possibly available by licensing, maps with soil hotspots and dry spots. Then you've got farm vehicles now. Many, but not all of them by a long way, contain GPS. They're measuring things like wheel slip, which will be impacted by what the analog machine is trying to do with the soil behind it. Combine harvesters, as people have mentioned, are heavily monitored. Whether or not the resolution is good enough as they go across the field to pick up features, we're not sure. But there's also government surveys constantly, so the farmers are always having to do their IACs or its equivalent now. A lot of this farming tends to be driven by money these days, particularly. So I reckon that you'll see less and less grown of what you might call traditional arable, where every time I see your pictures, it always seems to be a nice, even, flat field and so forth. But if you listen to what Tesco, Sainsbury's and the others are saying, they want to source more vegetables and more high-value crops from within the UK. That's going to give you some real problem with aerial survey, I suspect, because it's a much less regularity of field type that you're going to find. I think I've touched on that already. So just moving through, these are fairly random thoughts. Ant described a project earlier on in 3 sentences, as is his wont, which is probably a 3-year, £1.5 million project. Let's say, call it dynamic control of subsurface object avoidance or detection. That's what I call it as an engineer.
See, Dave, you need to build his one into your canon now. You can avoid Beckisms.
There are quite a few other players obviously interested. You're interested in the archaeology, but there are utilities, there are just implement damage from rocks, for example, is quite an issue in some areas, and so on. So I think I'm pretty much coming to the end of my introduction to what the other. I don't know what else you wanted me to talk about, but there we go. The one other thing I've got down here is automation and data management. It's an absolutely key problem, and it takes a lot of investment to make it work. I mean, if you think we now take for granted Google Maps, that's been several billions of investment with many hundreds of engineers, programmers working on it, and it's still not right. I mean, this morning my GPS took me to the top of the hill because it didn't recognise the Stoner building, it wanted the EC Stoner building. Little trivial things like that. So there's still a lot of human interaction needed to get the right sort of data. So I think that's probably the next 30 years of engineering and software is how to make data access a lot easier. That's it, really.
It illustrates really that coming to the end of a 3-year project and we haven't got all the answers, well, you know, it would be wrong for us to believe that we would have all the answers. Because it's evident that in these areas that are linked to archaeology, we're looking at whether it's soil runoff water or agriculture in the medium in which the archaeology is buried. There's the similar problems. Technology itself isn't sufficient to answer the question. We still need all of the willingness and disciplinary attributes to sort out.
Cool. I think the reason why we wanted to have both Toby and Bob here was to put this kind of work within these broader settings. We've talked quite a lot today about scaling up this research and doing things on a national and potentially international level. We're not going to do that on our own. We don't have the resources, we don't have the access to the land, we don't have basically, in some respects, the ability in the nous. And what we need to start doing is working more closely with soil scientists, hydrologists, farm managers, land managers, Natural England, all of these different organisations, because we have overlapping problems and we're using the same data to address our different issues. And to me, the point of this section is, how do we start to move that forward? I mean, Dart, in one respect, I think, has done a great thing by actually just working with the RAU in the first instance, and it's been a wonderful relationship. But how can we start to sustain that, but also make it bigger? Because we need to work broader.
Just make a comment about potential soil moisture deficits, because actually, I think it links nearly everything that we've talked about. Okay, and I've been saying you're not supposed to be able to use it on a daily basis. Well, this data here is literally within the last week, fortnight. And I've been looking at the WISI for 10 years, okay, and looking for erosion, runoff, and when field drains started. So it had nothing to do with anything like this originally. If you look at the stream flow, it does go up and down absolutely enormously. What year is this? 2007. You can see, if you look at the rainfall and try to correlate it with stream runoff, it's rubbish. But if you correlate it with potential soil moisture deficits, it can be really rather good. I think correlation coefficient of 0.7 for a natural phenomenon is actually shit out. And it can be, it varies from year to year, and that's what I don't know because I haven't had the time to look at it. But this is based on what you might call full rates of evapotranspiration. So both evaporation from surfaces, plant surfaces, and bare soil, as well as transpiration by the crop. If, what I'm saying, you can actually use full rates, it's already data there actually, because this is from 1967. So I would like the dark guys to get together with their crop growth, their soil moisture information, and all this kind of thing, and say, are there constraints, particularly on your deep soils and stuff like that? And how do they relate to the kind of things that you can get from a 1967 technical monograph or from Morix? Because if you get those, I think you're willing to the hydrologists and all sorts of other people. Like maybe that these things have been solved, but as far as I'm aware, they haven't. So I think this is really rather important. I do. I hadn't expected anything like this. I've worked on erosion and runoff for a very long time, and at the moment, you'll have to forgive this, but I've probably got the best correlation between the amount of soil that disappears out of the field to soil time that anybody in the world has got. And that's a correlation coefficient of probably about 0.5. And I don't know anybody else in the literature anywhere near like this. So these are quite interesting figures. So I think the dark guys have got quite a lot of good information. And if you could do it in your last 3 weeks. I'm sorry if this is very centred on me, but this is a problem that I've got and it interests me. And I think DART, and one of the reasons I wanted to be part of it, is because I thought they might be able to help on some of these things, and I think they probably will. And I think it's quite important for quite a lot of other people. Because the other things that you're looking at about soil compaction and various other things, we're busy compacting the soil. At the moment, there's lots and lots of evidence now, it's not just anecdotal, that over the last 20, 30 years, our soils have got a lot more compact. And that's quite serious, because there will be more runoff, there will be more flooding, and all these kind of things. So, the kind of thing that DARC have been doing, there's lots of things I think it can be doing with the data that could help us in agriculture and hydrology. I'm sorry to rant, I think it's quite important. That's what they killed the storm there.
This is predictable, obviously, for me, but I share a lot of the same interests, and within that, we have a joint set of staff called Catchment Sensitive Farming. Who are half natural and half environment agency, whose whole concern is about soil compaction and preventing runoff and implementing the framework directive. And I think still, from what I can gather of their day-to-day land management activities, they're a bit ignorant sometimes of archaeology. They think that concrete ink and historic farmyards, for example, is a brilliant idea, and I protest it strongly. But they are still basing a lot of their policies on stopping surface runoff. And if this project can prove that it's coming through the soil matrix, that will make a massive difference on what government bodies fund on the ground in terms of, at the moment, we will give a farmer money to block rips and block land drains on their land, so we're trying to stop this. But if it's coming through the soil anyway, we're wasting government money, we're wasting your taxpayers' money, so we really, really would like to know the answer.
And a lot of farmers can actually work it out. A lot of, certainly on arable land, they all have their own round gauge. I have, from the metaphor round gauges, I have 3 of those and 2 from the farmers, and the farmers' ones are better. A, they're on the catchment, and B, there are gaps in the data from the other ones. But farmers, and if you've got, if you can work out your evapotranspiration rates per day, you can almost just say, well, if this is down next week, my field grains are going to run, but they're not going to run. And if they're not going to run, he can do whatever he wants. Well, he's got a lot more flexibility. This is actually fairly important to the individual guys. Because at some point, somebody's going to start waving the big stick. And we'll be talking about quite a lot of money. I give them more to go.
Got back to the stick.
Right, that's a constant point of waving big sticks. We need to move on because we're coming to the end, but we haven't reached it yet.
Such is the way.
Well, I think we're at that kind of wrap up and final discussion.
Just one more. Contact details when we circulate.
No one has said that they shouldn't be circulated or want to be knocked off the list, so I will circulate. Elaine is going to type up the notes over the next couple of days, so they will be part of the circulation as well.
Because I'm very keen to get a few student projects going because we've got a lot of landowners' children are becoming as students, and they often have home areas that they can go at home and monitor very effectively. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. And you really asked about people who didn't pre-register whether they put their names down.
Yes, I have done. Okay, so this is our kind of basically our final wrap up and an opportunity to bring to the floor any outstanding things that we might have missed and to raise any action points. I think one of the major things today came from the policy conversation. Thanks to Dave to actually bring that to a good tangible conclusion where we can start to bring something to both Algeo and the IFA. I think it is important we can start to take some of the outputs as it's tenuous, but as they are still early stage, but we need to, as Martin said, engage curatorial and commercial environments with the research programme. So I think initially, is there anything else that people think that we should be doing before we wrap up completely? Say now, or drop me an email. Cool. That means nothing. Drop me an email. that. Otherwise, I'd like to thank everyone who spoke today. I think it's been a very good day. It's helped to crystallise some of the ideas I've had. It's been good to bring everything together. Thank you for being generally open in discussions. I think we opened up a few cans of worms, and it's been a bit of a breath of fresh air. So that's been really, really to get as much from you as from the people at the front, and I think that's been well received and is very helpful. So thank you. Otherwise, I think I might just pass over to Tony to give final PI.
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody again very much for coming, for your contribution, not just today, but for the entire time you've been involved with the DART project. Please keep in contact, both with us and with each other. I guess we're hoping to put in sort of follow-on funding, so we hope that at least some of you will be involved in that and can lend your support to that. Chris was earlier on talking about the importance of impact for academics, so we're always keen on maintaining contact, finding out, if you do use some of our data, it's out there, you can just use it without telling us, but we'd love to know. And if there are things more that we can try to do to help facilitate that, again, please let us know. Obviously, the earlier you do that, the more likely is we might have some resource still to do that. Apart from that, it's been a great 3.5 years. I can't believe how quickly it's gone. I started knowing absolutely nothing about archaeology. I know slightly more now, thanks to some of my colleagues' education. It's been a very interesting project, I think, and I hope that everybody feels they've got something out of it.
We will probably be carrying on conversations at the pub. I'm not sure which. I assume you head towards the station, so that's how perhaps it's closed and refurbishment, isn't it? Ooh, people got a better lead. You, I think, we'll come to that. But also, if you could take your cups with you and put them in the bin at the back, it will help with the general tidying up which we'll be doing. Which is progress too far.